My name is Walter Myers. I'm 72 years old, and on the night I planned to hand my daughter everything I'd built, she asked a waiter to move me away from the table because I embarrassed her. I didn't raise my voice. I've never been a man who raised his voice. I smiled. I finished my glass of water, and I asked for the check. That's when the manager came across the room, pale as the tablecloth, leaned down to my ear and asked me a question my daughter will be explaining to her in-laws for the rest of her life. I'll get to the question. I want you to understand the man first, because the whole thing only makes sense if you know what kind of father gets told to move away from his own family's table, and what he was carrying in his coat pocket when it happened. There were 2 envelopes in that coat. By the end of the night, I only handed over one of them. Welcome back to The Wise Papa. This is the channel where we tell the quiet stories of fathers who got underestimated and answered with dignity instead of noise. If that's the kind of story you came for, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of the evening, and a little further back than that, to a small kitchen in 1979. Let me describe myself the way my daughter sees me, because it matters. I wear the same brown canvas jacket I've worn for 15 years. It has a coffee stain on the left cuff that predates the current president. I drive a 2011 pickup, and on my wrist I wear a Timex that cost $19 at a drugstore in 1991 because my wife Rosemary gave it to me. And a man doesn't replace a gift like that just because he can afford a better one. To Lindsay, all of this is an embarrassment. The jacket, the truck, the watch. She sees a man who looks like he should be fixing the furnace, not sitting at a white tablecloth restaurant. What she doesn't see, what she's decided not to see, is that I prefer it this way. I've learned something in 72 years. People tell you exactly who they are the moment they think you can't do anything for them. A waiter who's kind to the man in the cheap jacket is a waiter with character. A son-in-law who looks straight through that man is telling you the truth about himself, free of charge. So I dress plain and I sit at ordinary tables and I watch. You'd be amazed what people will say in front of a man they've decided is nobody. People underestimate a man who doesn't dress like his bank account. I've let them do it my whole life. It's the cheapest, most reliable test there is. That night at the restaurant, my whole family was about to take that test. Only one of them passed. She was 12. In 1979, Rosemary and I opened a 12-table diner called the Copper Kettle on a state route in the Hudson Valley. We had $4,000, a used flat-top grill, and a hand-lettered menu she wrote out herself at the kitchen table, pressing so hard the pen went through the paper twice. Meatloaf, pot roast, a soup of the day that depended entirely on what hadn't sold the day before. I cooked. She ran the floor and the books and everything that actually mattered. We lived in the 2 rooms above it. For the first 3 years, we took 1 day off, total. That diner became 2 diners. 2 became a steakhouse. By the time I was 60, Rosemary and I owned 6 restaurants across the valley, including a quiet, expensive place called the Carriage House that did 300 covers on a Saturday and had a 6-week wait for a window table. We never told people. We didn't put our name on the door. The holding company is called Myers Hospitality, but the restaurants all have their own names, their own stories. I liked it that way. I liked walking into my own steakhouse and having a new hostess ask if I had a reservation. Rosemary died 2 years ago, ovarian. She ran the floor of the Carriage House on a Friday night in October and was gone by February. I kept her first hand-lettered menu, had it framed. It hangs in a back hallway of the Carriage House by the kitchen door, where the staff pass it 100 times a night and the customers never see it. That menu is going to matter later. So is the soup. For now, just know this. Everything I am, I built in a kitchen with her, and my daughter has spent 20 years trying to forget it. Lindsay is 41 now, my only child. She grew up in those 2 rooms above the diner. She did her homework in a back booth and fell asleep to the sound of the dishwasher. When she was 9, a girl at school found out where she lived and called her the soup kid, and Lindsay cried in the walk-in cooler where she thought no one could hear her. I should have paid more attention to that day. I think it set something in her that never came out, because Lindsay grew up and married up. She married Brett Cole, of the Cole family, who have a name in this county and a house with a circular driveway and absolutely no idea how to be kind to anyone they consider beneath them. Lindsay learned their manners fast, too fast. She tells people her father is retired. When pressed, she says I was in food service briefly. She has, I happen to know, told her mother-in-law that I did some consulting. She is ashamed of the soup. She is ashamed of the kitchen. She is ashamed of the man who stood in it for 40 years so that she'd never have to. And here's the thing that breaks my heart, even now. I don't think Lindsay is cruel. I think she's frightened. I think every time she looks at my brown jacket, she sees the soup kid in the walk-in cooler, and she hates that little girl, and she takes it out on me. That's not an excuse. By the end of this story, you'll agree it isn't. But it's the truth, and I promised you the truth. She invited her in-laws to my birthday dinner. She did not, it turned out, remember it was my birthday. Here's what nobody at that table knew. The dinner was my idea. I'd called Lindsay 3 weeks earlier and said I wanted to take the family out for a nice meal. My treat. Someplace special. I suggested the Carriage House. She was thrilled. Not because of me, but because the Carriage House is the kind of place the Coles approve of. "Daddy, that's actually a really good choice," she said, sounding surprised that I'd know it existed. I did know it existed. I own it. But I didn't say that, because I had a plan, and the plan needed her not to know. In my coat I was carrying a folder. Inside it were papers my lawyer had drawn up. A transfer of a controlling interest in Myers Hospitality. 6 restaurants, the holding company, all of it, into my daughter's hands. I was going to give Lindsay the company. On my 72nd birthday, at the finest restaurant I own, I was going to slide that folder across the table and tell her that everything Rosemary and I built was hers now. That was the plan. That's the kind of fool a father can be. Brett found out about the dinner and asked if he could bring a guest. A man named Pendleton, an investor he was desperate to land for his own struggling company. Great optics, Brett said. Family, success, the whole picture. I said yes. I wanted to see Brett work. You learn a lot about a man by watching him try to impress someone richer than himself. So that was the table. Me, Lindsay, Brett. Brett's mother, Pamela. Their daughter, Emma, who's 12. And Pendleton, the investor. 6 people. 1 birthday nobody remembered. And 1 folder that was about to go back in my pocket, unopened. You might ask why I didn't just tell her. Walk in, announce I owned the place, hand her the company, accept the hug. Because I needed to know something first. For 2 years since Rosemary died, I'd gone quiet. I stepped back from the day-to-day. I let Lindsay believe I'd sold everything and was rattling around in retirement. And in those 2 years, she'd called me less, visited less, and stopped entirely, asking how I was doing. I wanted to know who my daughter was when she thought I had nothing left to give her. Because a man only finds that out once, and usually too late, after he's already signed everything over. I didn't want to be loved for the restaurants. I'd had enough of that in my life. The suppliers, the landlords, the people who got warm when they smelled money. I wanted just once before I handed it all away, to be loved for the man who built them, or at least treated like a person. That was the test. The brown jacket, the ordinary table, the father who looked like he had nothing. If she'd been kind to that man, even just neutral, even just polite, I'd have handed her the world. I want you to remember that when we get to what she said. She didn't fail a test she didn't know she was taking. Not really. The test was just, be decent to your old father in a restaurant. The bar was on the floor. All she had to do was not step under it. Forgiveness and a key to everything you own are 2 different gifts. I was ready to give both that night. I ended up giving neither. I got to the Carriage House early. I always do. Old habit. You walk your own floor before service to feel the room. I came in the side, the way the staff do. Desmond met me by the kitchen. Desmond Pratt has managed the Carriage House for 11 years, and he's worked for me for 30. He started as a 17-year-old dishwasher at the second diner, with a baby at home and holes in his shoes. And I watched him work, and I promoted him again, and he has never once let me down. He's the closest thing I have to a son, which is a sentence I didn't realize was true until that night. Mr. Myers, he said, surprised, I didn't see the reservation under your name. It's under Cole, I said. Party of 6. My daughter's hosting. As far as anyone at that table knows tonight, I'm just Lindsay's dad. I don't own the place, understand? Desmond's been with me long enough not to ask why. He just nodded slowly. You want the usual, sit you somewhere you can watch the room? Put me at the table with them, I said. I'm family tonight, just family. He gave me a long look. He knew Lindsay. He'd watched her come in over the years and not recognize the busboys she grew up with. But he's a professional, so all he said was, yes, sir. And he seated me at the big round table by the window, the best one in the house, and he didn't tell a soul. Then he went and quietly told the entire staff one thing. The man in the brown jacket at table 14 is to be treated like an ordinary guest and watched like the most important one. They were about to earn their keep. The Coles arrived in a cloud of cologne and confidence. Brett came first, big and loud, in a suit that cost more than my first car, already talking before he was through the door. Behind him, his mother Pamela, 68, in pearls, with the permanent expression of a woman smelling something she's too polite to mention. Then Pendleton, the investor, quiet, watchful, the only one besides me doing more listening than talking. Then Lindsay, my daughter. She looked beautiful and tense, scanning the room to make sure it measured up, smoothing a dress that didn't need smoothing. And Emma, 12 years old, in a slightly too big blazer she'd clearly chosen herself, who saw me across the room and broke into a run. Grandpa! She hit me at full speed. She smelled like green apple shampoo and crayons. You came early. Did you see the dessert cart? They have a whole cart. I saw the cart, I said. I have plans for the cart. Lindsay arrived a beat later, and her eyes did the thing they always do now. They started at my face, dropped to the brown jacket, flicked to the Timex and tightened. A quick, involuntary wince. She thinks I don't see it. I see it every time. Dad, you're here. She kissed the air beside my cheek. You couldn't have worn the gray sweater. I bought you the gray sweater. I like this jacket. Of course you do, she said, already turning to arrange where everyone would sit, already steering Pendleton toward the chair furthest from me. Nobody said happy birthday. I noted it the way you note the weather. Not surprised, just filed away. Emma climbed into the chair beside mine without being told, and stayed there all night, and that turned out to be the bravest thing anyone did. While they settled in and argued pleasantly about wine, I sat with my hand resting on the breast of my jacket, where the inside pocket was. There were 2 envelopes in there. The first was the folder from my lawyer, the transfer papers, Lindsay's inheritance, early, a controlling stake in everything. I'd had it drawn up a month before, signed my part, left the line for the date blank so I could fill it in tonight, at the table, in front of her family. A grand gesture, a father's whole life, handed across a tablecloth. The second envelope was smaller, and it embarrasses me a little to tell you about it. It was a birthday card, to me, from me. I'd bought it myself, 3 days earlier, at the pharmacy where I buy my Timex batteries. Because I'd done the math and realized that since Rosemary died, no one had remembered my birthday 2 years running, and I didn't want to spend a third one pretending I didn't notice. So I bought a card, and I wrote something kind in it in my own hand, and I put it in my coat, and I figured at some point in the evening I'd excuse myself to the men's room and read it, and that would be that. A 72-year-old man carrying a birthday card he wrote to himself, ready to give his daughter a 6-restaurant company. I tell you that not for pity. I tell you so you understand the size of what was on the table, and the size of the man sitting there in the brown jacket, and exactly how little it would have cost any of them to be kind. 2 envelopes. By dessert, I'd hand over only one of them. And it wasn't going to be the one I came in planning to give. The small cuts started before the bread did. When the waiter, a young man named Thomas, who I happen to know has a newborn at home, set down the water, I thanked him by name. I'd seen his name tag. It's a habit 40 years deep. Lindsay leaned in the second he stepped away. Dad, don't do that. Do what? Talk to the waiters like you know them. Like you're... She searched for the word. Friendly with them. It's a nice restaurant. Just let them do their job. It's polite to use a man's name, I said. It's weird, she whispered. It makes us look like we don't belong here. Please, for me, just tonight. Don't belong here. At a table in a restaurant I owned, my daughter was worried I'd make us look like we didn't belong. I let it go. I sipped my water. Across the table, Brett was in full flight, telling Pendleton about his vision, his footprint, his family's long history in hospitality. That last part nearly made me choke. The Coles have never run anything but their own mouths. The only person at that table with a long history in hospitality was sitting in a brown jacket being told not to learn the waiter's name. Pamela watched me eat my bread the way you watch a dog you're not sure is housebroken. Emma beside me quietly switched her bread plate for mine because she'd noticed mine had the burnt roll. She didn't say anything about it, she just did it. 12 years old. Already a better human being than 3 of the adults at that table combined. I gave her knee a small pat under the tablecloth. She gave me a thumbs up by her water glass where her mother couldn't see. We were a 2-person team. We had no idea yet how much we'd need to be. Brett spent the first half of that dinner building a version of himself for Pendleton to invest in. It was a performance, and I'll give him this. He's good at it. He talked about his company like it was already the thing he wished it were. He name-dropped. He ordered the second most expensive bottle on the list, which is exactly what a man does when he wants you to think he could afford the most expensive one. I know that wine list. I set the prices on it. I watched my own staff move around the table, the timing of the courses, the way Thomas cleared from the right, the busser who refilled water without being asked. It was good service. Tight. I felt the particular pride you only feel watching something you built run well without you. Rosemary used to call it the floor breathing. A good restaurant breathes. This one was breathing fine. Brett, mid-story, snapped his fingers at Thomas for more bread. Snapped his fingers. At a man with a newborn at home, in my dining room. I set my own bread down. I'd been about to take a bite. Brett, I said mildly, he's got 8 tables. He'll get to it. Brett looked at me like the furniture had spoken. It's fine, Walt. It's their job. He turned back to Pendleton. Sorry. Where was I? Walt. Nobody calls me Walt. Rosemary called me Walter, always, even when she was angry, especially when she was angry. Pendleton, I noticed, did not laugh at Brett's joke about the bread. Pendleton had gone a little quiet, the way I'd gone quiet. He was watching the table the way I watch a table. It takes one to know one. Pendleton was running his own test, and Brett was failing it in real time, snapping his fingers with no idea at all. Then Pendleton did something interesting. He turned to me. Walter, he said, the only person all night to use my full name. Lindsay's father, you've been quiet. What's your line of work? It was a simple, courteous question, the kind a decent man asks the oldest person at the table to bring him into the conversation. I opened my mouth to answer. I didn't get the chance. Oh, Dad's retired, Lindsay cut in fast with a little laugh, putting her hand on Pendleton's arm to turn him back toward her. He was in food service for a while. Small stuff. Nothing you'd know. He mostly just takes it easy now. She smiled. Don't get him started. He'll talk your ear off about the old days. Small stuff. Nothing you'd know. I closed my mouth. I picked up my water and I took a slow sip. And over the rim of the glass, I looked at my daughter, and she didn't even notice, because she'd already moved on, steering the conversation back to Brett's footprint and Brett's vision. Here's what she'd just done without knowing it. She'd been handed the chance to be proud of me, in front of the very people she was trying to impress. And she'd used it to make me smaller instead. She'd taken the man who built 6 restaurants and filed him under nothing you'd know. Pendleton let himself be turned, but his eyes came back to me once, with an expression I recognized. Not pity, something more like a question he'd decided to hold on to. He'd heard it too, the way she said it. Emma beside me had stopped eating. She was looking at her mother with a small, stunned frown, the frown of a child watching a parent do something she can't quite forgive. I patted her knee again. Not yet, the pat said, not yet. Under the table, where the adults couldn't see, Emma and I had our own dinner going. She told me about her science project, a model bridge. I told you in another life I'd have loved this kid even if she weren't mine. She told me her teacher was unfair and her best friend was being weird, and she wanted to learn to cook, but her mom said the kitchen was for the help. That last one she said quietly, watching me like she knew it would land wrong. Your mom said that? Emma nodded. She doesn't like me being in kitchens. She says I'll smell like grease. Then lower. But I like it. I like watching the cooks. I went and looked in the kitchen here before, and a man let me see them make the sauce. My chest did something complicated. Emma, I said, can you keep a secret? A really good one? Her eyes went wide. Yes. Come with me. I want to show you something. We'll be back before the steaks. I caught Desmond's eye across the room and tipped my head toward the back hallway. He understood. He always understands. He drifted over and murmured to Lindsay that the gentleman was going to show his granddaughter the wine room, and Lindsay waved a hand without looking, relieved probably to have me out of Pendleton's sightline for a few minutes. So I took my granddaughter's hand, and I walked her past the kitchen, into the back hallway, to the one thing in that whole expensive building that actually mattered to me. I was about to show a 12-year-old the secret her mother had spent 20 years trying to bury, and the 12-year-old was going to understand it instantly, which is more than I can say for the grown woman at the table. The back hallway of the carriage house smells like every kitchen I've ever loved. Butter and char and the green smell of fresh herbs. The staff hurried past us with plates. A line cook nodded at me, a small private nod, and Emma caught it and filed it away. On the wall, between the kitchen door and the stairs to the cellar, in a plain black frame, hangs a single sheet of paper, yellowed and soft, the ink gone brown. It's Rosemary's first menu, the copper kettle, 1979, meatloaf, pot roast, soup of the day, written in her hand, pressed so hard you can read it with your fingertips, like Braille. This, I told Emma, is the most expensive thing in this entire building, and it's worth about nothing, and it's worth everything. She stepped up close and read it, her lips moving. Soup of the day, she whispered. Grandpa, whose is this? Your great-grandmother's. My Rosemary. She wrote it the year we opened our first restaurant, a little diner, 12 tables. We lived upstairs. I touched the frame. Everything your family has, this nice house your other grandmother lives in, the school you go to. All of it started with that soup, with this piece of paper. Emma was quiet a long moment. Then she said the thing that nearly took my legs out. Why doesn't Mom ever talk about it? It's the best part. It's the best part. Out of the mouths of 12-year-olds. I turned the frame slightly and showed her the back, where Rosemary had written one more line, years later, in pen for no one in particular, for the ones who remember where the soup started. She wrote that for people like you, I told Emma, people who remember, and standing in that hallway, with my granddaughter's hand in mine and my dead wife's handwriting on the wall, I made the decision I'd been circling all night. Quietly, completely, the way you set a screw the last quarter turn. The folder in my coat was not going to Lindsay, not tonight, maybe not ever. But I didn't know yet just how thoroughly she'd prove me right. We still had to go back to the table. On the way back, Desmond intercepted me by the service station out of Emma's earshot. Mr. Myers. He kept his voice low and his face calm, the way I taught him. I have to ask. The staff have figured out who you are. Tomas recognized you from the company holiday photo. They're getting nervous. Your daughter just sent the sommelier away pretty sharply. The kids on the floor want to know if they should say something. Should we tell them? Should we tell her? I thought about it. There's a version of the night where I let Desmond announce me right then. Walter Myers, owner. Watch the table rearrange itself around the news. Watch Lindsay's face flip from embarrassment to scrambling pride. Watch Brett's eyes light up with sudden new respect for the old man's bank account. That version was tempting. It's the version most people would take. But it would have been a lie, in a way. It would have let Lindsay off the hook. She'd have been kind to the owner. I'd never have found out how she treated the father. Not yet, I told Desmond. Tell the staff to relax and do their jobs. Treat me exactly like a guest. Don't tell her anything. I put a hand on his shoulder. Let the night right itself, Desmond. We're almost to the end of the chapter. He didn't love it. I could see he didn't love it. He'd watched Lindsay's wince at my jacket from across the room, and Desmond is protective of me in a way my own daughter has never been. But he nodded. Yes, sir. Then quieter. For what it's worth, sir. Happy birthday. I've got the kitchen making the thing. Don't argue. The thing, Rosemary's pot roast, off menu, the way only my kitchen still makes it. Somebody remembered. He just wasn't related to me by blood. When Emma and I got back to the table, Lindsay was waiting for us with a tight smile and tighter eyes. Where did you take her? She asked Emma, but looking at me. Grandpa showed me the kitchen hallway, Emma said, glowing. There's a menu on the wall that great-grandma wrote, and... Emma! Lindsay's voice cut clean. We don't go in the kitchen areas. How many times? Go sit down. Wash your hands. You've probably touched everything. Emma's glow went out. She sat. Lindsay turned to me and dropped her voice to the hiss she reserves for me now. Dad, I'm asking you one thing tonight. One thing. Sit still. Don't wander off with the staff. Don't take my daughter into kitchens. Don't talk to the waiters like they're your buddies. This dinner matters to Brett. To us. Just be normal, please. Be normal. I looked at my daughter, this woman I taught to ride a bike in a diner parking lot, who once cried in a walk-in cooler because a child called her the soup kid, and who had grown up to be ashamed of soup. I didn't argue. Arguing is loud, and I've never had much use for loud. I just picked up my glass of water, and I took a slow drink, and I set it down again. That glass of water was the only thing keeping my hands busy and my mouth shut. I'd drink a lot of it before the night was over. All right, Lindsay, I said. I'll be normal. She exhaled, relieved, and turned back to her guests. She thought she'd won something. She thought she'd managed me. What she'd actually done was use up the very last of a patience I'd been extending her for 2 years. The bar was on the floor. She was about to step under it. Before the main course, Brett did something that told me everything. He followed me to the men's corridor when I stepped away, and he caught my elbow, and his whole manner changed. The loud confidence dropped off him like a coat. What was underneath was nervous. Walter, listen. Man to man. He glanced back toward the table. Pendleton's close, but he's not there. I need to show him the family's got real backing. Solid money behind the name. He wet his lips. If you could see your way to even a small investment, a number I could mention, even just let me imply you're a backer. It'd close him tonight. I'd pay it back, obviously. It's a sure thing. So there it was. The same man who'd called me Walt and snapped his fingers at my waiter and let his wife file me under nothing you'd know. That same man in a hallway where no one could see wanted my money. Was, in fact, counting on it. They all were, I realized. That was the shape of it. To their faces I was an embarrassment. In the quiet I was a resource. They wanted the old man gone from the table and his checkbook left behind. Brett, I said, let me understand. You want me to fund you, but at the table you'd rather I weren't there at all. It's not like that, he said too fast. It's exactly like that. I patted his arm, the way you reassure someone you've stopped taking seriously. Let's get back. Your steak's coming. I left him standing in the hallway, and I went back to the table, and I sat down next to Emma, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The main course arrived, and with it, the moment my daughter forgot I was a person at all. I want to be honest with you about something because it's the part I'm least proud of and most human about. Even then, after the jacket comments, the nothing you'd know, the be normal, after I'd watched Brett beg in a hallway, even then a piece of me was still looking for the exit, still hoping. That's what being a father does to you. It leaves a door open long after the cold's been coming through it for years. I sat there with Rosemary's pot roast in front of me, the off-menu plate Desmond's kitchen had made for a birthday no one mentioned, and I thought, maybe this is the bottom. Maybe she's gotten it out of her system. Maybe the rest of the night she'll soften, and she'll catch my eye, and she'll remember it's my birthday, and she'll say one warm thing, and I'll let the door swing wide, and I'll give her everything after all. I'm not too proud to tell you I wanted that. I wanted my daughter back more than I wanted to be right. I cut a bite of the pot roast. It tasted exactly like 1979. It tasted like rosemary leaning over my shoulder at the flat top, saying, "You're rushing it, Walter. Let it rest." I had to put my fork down for a second. When I looked up, Lindsay was watching me eat with that expression, the dog that might not be housebroken expression she'd inherited straight from her mother-in-law. The door was still open, barely a crack. She was about to kick it shut herself, with a single sentence, in front of everyone, and not even feel the wood hit the frame. Here's what happened. The table was at that tricky point in a dinner where the food is good, but the conversation has thinned, and everyone's a little too aware of everyone else. Pendleton had gone formal and short with Brett. Anyone who's closed a deal could see that investor was already 3/4 of the way out the door, cooling by the minute. Brett could feel it too, and panic makes people worse. He was getting louder, reaching, knocking his glass, laughing at his own lines a half-second early. Pamela had decided the evening was beneath her and was inspecting the dessert menu like it owed her money. And Lindsay was unraveling in the specific way of a person whose carefully staged evening is slipping and who needs badly to find someone to blame for it. Her eyes kept landing on me, on the brown jacket, on the Timex, on the father who used the waiter's name and took her daughter into kitchens and would not, no matter how she hissed, become the polished, retired consultant she'd invented for the coals. I could see her deciding, without quite knowing she was deciding, that the problem with the night was me. I reached for my water glass again. I'd nearly emptied it. Tomas, good as ever, started across the room with a pitcher to refill it. That refill, that ordinary kind professional refill, was about to become the most expensive glass of water in the history of the carriage house. Because as Thomas leaned in to pour, I shifted my chair back to give him room, and my elbow nudged the table, and a fork clinked off a plate. And the small sound drew Lindsay's eyes, and something in her stretched too thin all night finally snapped. She turned to Thomas, and in front of Pendleton and Pamela and Emma and the whole quiet dining room, she said it. "Seat Grandpa somewhere else," Lindsay said to the waiter. "He embarrasses us." The words came out clean and sharp and loud enough to carry to the next table. For a second nobody moved. Thomas froze mid-pour, the pitcher tilted, a thin ribbon of water hanging in the air. She wasn't done. Now that it was out, the rest came in a rush, the way a thing comes out when you've been holding it for 20 years. "Is there a smaller table? A bar seat? Anywhere, honestly." She gestured at me without looking at me, a flick of the hand you'd use to shoo a fly off a plate. "He'll be more comfortable. He doesn't really do places like this. It's fine, just not here. Not at this table. Not at this table." At a dinner I was paying for, in a restaurant I owned, on my birthday. Emma made a small sound beside me, a sharp little intake of breath, and put her hand on my arm. Pamela's eyebrows climbed. Even she, even snobbish, pearled Pamela Cole, looked, for one flickering instant, like she'd seen something she wished she hadn't. Her gaze dropped to her plate. She said nothing, but she'd flinched. I saw it. Pendleton set down his fork very, very quietly. And me? I want to tell you exactly what I felt, because it surprised me. I didn't feel rage. I'd spent the rage 2 years ago, alone, in a house that still smelled like rosemary. What I felt was a strange, clean stillness. The stillness of a man who has finally, after holding a door open in the cold for years, felt it click shut, and discovered that the click is a kind of peace. I smiled. I reached for my water. I picked up my glass, the one Thomas had just half filled, and I drank it. All of it, slowly, to the bottom. You could have heard a napkin drop in that dining room. I have learned over a long life that silence is the loudest thing a calm man owns. People expect you to shout. When you don't, when you simply finish your water and fold your napkin and set it beside your plate, they lean in. They wait. The silence does work that anger never could. I set the empty glass down. I laid my napkin on the table, squared, the way Rosemary taught me a guest should. Then I looked up, not at Lindsay, not yet, and I raised one hand, just slightly, to catch the eye of the young man across the room. "Tomas," I said. My voice was easy, almost warm. "Could you bring me the check, please?" Lindsay rolled her eyes, relief flooding back into her face. She thought I was leaving. She thought she'd won, that the embarrassing old man was going to gather his cheap jacket and slink off to a bar seat or out the door, and the night could be salvaged, and she could apologize to Pendleton for her quaint, difficult father. "Thank you, Dad," she said, already turning back to the table. "I really think it's better. We'll come by the house this week, okay?" Better. This week. The brush-off complete. Thomas didn't move toward the kitchen. He looked at me. Then he looked across the room at Desmond, who had gone very still by the host stand. A question passed between the staff, fast and silent, the way it does in a room that's breathing. I just held Thomas's eye and waited, calm as still water. The poor kid didn't know what to do, so Desmond did it for him. Here's what the table didn't understand, in that moment, about why the waiter had frozen. To them, it looked like incompetence. Lindsay's patience, already gone, snapped a second time. "Did you hear him?" she said to Thomas, too loud. "He asked for the check, and I asked you to move him. Is there a problem? Do we need to speak to a manager?" "Oh, Lindsay, yes. We very much needed to speak to a manager." Thomas, 24 years old, newborn at home, holding a water pitcher in the worst social situation of his young career, opened his mouth and closed it. He could not, for the life of him, figure out how to tell this woman that the man she was trying to throw out was the reason he had a job, a paycheck, and dental coverage for the baby. So he did the only thing he could. He said, "One moment, ma'am. Let me get the manager," and he practically fled. Lindsay turned to the table with a brittle little laugh, smoothing it over. "I'm so sorry. The service here is usually better. Honestly." She shot me a look that said, "See what you've started." Brett, sensing the evening circling the drain, tried to relaunch his pitch. "Anyway, Pendleton, as I was saying, the projections for Q3—" "In a moment," Pendleton said quietly, not unkindly, but in a tone that closed Brett's mouth like a hand. The investor's eyes were on me. He'd watched me drink that water to the bottom. He'd watched the staff freeze. He was a man who read rooms for a living, and he'd figured out that something was happening here that none of the Coles had caught up to yet. Across the dining room, Desmond straightened his jacket, took a breath, and started toward our table. I caught his eye and gave him the smallest nod. It was time. Desmond Pratt crossed that dining room like a man walking to the front of a church. He stopped beside my chair. He did not look at Lindsay. He bent down to me, and his face, I'll never forget it, had gone pale. 2 spots of color high on his cheeks. The face of a man who has watched something he can't stand and is about to put a stop to it. He spoke quietly, but not too quietly. He pitched it on purpose so the whole table would hear. "Sir," Desmond said, "forgive me. Should I tell her that you own this restaurant?" The sentence landed on that table like a tray of glass hitting a tile floor. I watched it hit each of them in turn. Pamela's head snapped up. Pendleton's eyebrows rose, and the corner of his mouth, I swear, twitched. Brett said, "What?" out loud to no one. And Lindsay laughed, a high, disbelieving little laugh. The laugh of someone who's sure there's been a mistake. "What did he just say?" She looked around the table. That's not Desmond, is it? You must have him confused with someone." She turned to me, and for the first time all night, she really looked at me, searching my face for the joke. "Dad, tell him." I didn't say anything. I just held her gaze. Desmond answered for me, and his voice didn't waver. "I've worked for Mr. Myers for 30 years, ma'am," he said. "I started as his dishwasher when I was 17. He owns the carriage house. He owns Myers Hospitality, this restaurant, and 5 others. A beat. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to move him to a bar seat. He sits wherever he likes. He owns the chair. He owns the chair." The whole dining room had gone silent, and my daughter's face began slowly to come apart. For a moment, nobody at that table could find a word. Pamela Cole had put her dessert menu down. She was looking at Lindsay now, her son's wife, the woman who'd married into the family and lectured them all about appearances, with an expression of pure, cold reassessment. In Pamela's world, you do not humiliate a man who owns 6 restaurants. You especially do not turn out to be the kind of person who'd humiliate any old man, in a brown jacket, not knowing. Pamela had just learned something about her daughter-in-law, and none of it was good. Brett's mind, I could see, was working in a completely different and uglier direction. The shock on his face was curdling into calculation. Owns 6 restaurants. The man he'd begged for money in the hallway. The nothing father-in-law. Brett wasn't horrified by what his wife had done. Brett was horrified by the deal it might have cost him. And Pendleton. Pendleton sat back in his chair, folded his hands, and watched the Cole family with the expression of a man who has just been shown, free of charge, exactly who he'd nearly gone into business with. "Dad," Lindsay's voice had gone thin, Is that true? You own this place?" "I own this place," I said. It was the first thing I'd said to her since she told the waiter to move me. "I own the one in Rhinebeck you took the Coles to last spring, too. You sent the steak back. The kitchen made it again. I heard about it." Her hand had come up to her mouth. "I've owned restaurants your whole life, Lindsay," I said quietly. "You grew up over one. You just decided somewhere along the way that it was something to be ashamed of." And there it was, finally out loud, on the table between us, where it had been sitting all along. I stood up then, not in anger. An old man just gets stiff in a chair. I buttoned the brown jacket, the one she hated, and I spoke to the table, calmly, the way Desmond speaks to a room, without raising my voice once. "Let me clear a few things up since we have an audience." I nodded politely toward Pendleton, toward the nearby tables that had stopped pretending not to listen. "My name is Walter Myers. In 1979, my late wife and I opened a 12-table diner up the road with $4,000 and a handwritten menu. We lived above it. We worked it 7 days a week. That diner became this." I gestured at the room. The linen, the candlelight, the breathing floor. 6 restaurants, 300 employees. Desmond here started as my dishwasher and is the best operator I've ever known. And he just did the bravest, most loyal thing anyone's done for me in 2 years. Desmond looked at the floor. The man doesn't take a compliment well. I turned to Lindsay. "You told this gentleman I was in food service, briefly. Nothing he'd know. You told your in-laws I did some consulting. You've spent 2 decades editing me down to something small enough to be ashamed of." I let that sit. "Tonight you asked a young man with a newborn at home, a young man I employ, to move your own father to a bar seat because he embarrassed you. The dining room was so quiet you could hear the kitchen doors swing. He's not going anywhere," I said, nodding at my own chair. "He owns the chair." Lindsay's face had gone from white to blotched red, the way a face does when shame and panic arrive at the same time. She reached for me. "Dad, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said gently. "That's the whole problem, sweetheart. That's the entire problem." Pendleton chose that moment to stand up too. He was a quiet man, and he did a quiet thing. He stepped around the table, past Brett, and he extended his hand to me. "Mr. Myers," he said, "it's an honor. I ate at your steakhouse in Kingston for my anniversary. Best meal of my year." He shook my hand firmly, warmly, the way men shake hands when one of them has decided the other is the real thing. "My wife still talks about the short rib." "That's Desmond's recipe, actually," I said. "Tell her that." Pendleton smiled. Then he turned to Brett, and the smile went out like a switch. "Brett, thank you for dinner." His voice was even and final. "I'm going to pass on the opportunity we discussed. I don't think we're a fit." He glanced just once at Lindsay, then back at Brett. "I've found that how people treat the person they think can't help them tells me everything I need to know about a partnership. I think you understand." He didn't raise his voice either. He didn't have to. He set a business card by my plate, mine, not Brett's, said, "I'd love to talk sometime, Mr. Myers, no agenda," nodded to the table, and walked out. The deal Brett had staged the entire evening to land had just walked out the door, and it had walked out because of the thing his own wife had said. Pamela watched Pendleton go. Then she turned to Lindsay, and in a voice like dry ice, she said, "Well, I hope it was worth it," and she picked up her purse. Brett rounded on me, his face dark. The begging man from the hallway was gone. Something meaner had taken his place. That's when the real shouting started, and I, as it happened, stayed exactly as calm as the water in my glass. It was Lindsay who broke first, and she broke the way frightened people do, by attacking the person they've wronged. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice cracked across the table. You let me sit here and you let me say that in front of everyone, and the whole time you knew? You set me up. You let me humiliate myself. There it was. In her version, somehow I had humiliated her. By owning a restaurant, by saying nothing, by existing in a brown jacket. I did not raise my voice. I want you to picture it. My daughter on her feet, flushed and shaking, and me still seated, hands folded on the table, calm as a man waiting for soup. Lindsay, I said, sit down. People are watching, and you'll want to remember this conversation accurately later. She didn't sit, but she went quiet, breathing hard. You didn't humiliate yourself by not knowing I owned the building? I said. There's no shame in not knowing that. I hid it on purpose. I leaned forward slightly. You humiliated yourself by what you said when you thought I was nobody. When you thought I was just a man in a cheap jacket with no money and nothing to offer you. That's the version of me you told a waiter to throw out. And that, sweetheart, is the version of me that's actually your father. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. I wasn't testing whether you knew I was rich, I said. I was finding out whether you'd be kind to me when you were sure I wasn't. That was the whole test. The bar was on the floor. All you had to do was not say the thing you said. Brett started to speak. I lifted one finger, and to my mild surprise, he stopped. I wasn't finished. I'd been quiet for 2 years. I had a little more to say. You want to know why I dress like this? I said to Lindsay, but loud enough for the table. Why I drive the truck and wear the $19 watch your mother gave me? It's not because I'm cheap. I could buy this whole block. I turned the Timex on my wrist. It's because the jacket is a test, and almost everyone fails it. The world is full of people who are warm to a man they think has money and cold to a man they think doesn't. I learned a long time ago that the cheap jacket sorts them for me. I looked at her. You, I never wanted to sort. You're my daughter. I kept hoping you'd be the one person who didn't need me to be impressive. That's not fair, she whispered. You don't know what it was like. Growing up over the diner, the kids at school. I know about the walk-in cooler, I said. She went still. I know a girl called you the soup kid in 4th grade, and you cried where you thought nobody could hear you. I heard you, Lindsay. I stood outside that cooler door for 10 minutes, and I didn't know what to say to a 9-year-old, and I've regretted that silence for 30 years. My voice, for the first time, was not quite steady. But here's what you got wrong, and what I should have told you that day. The soup wasn't the thing to be ashamed of. The soup was the thing to be proud of. The soup paid for everything. The soup is the bravest thing your mother and I ever did. Emma beside me was crying quietly. She reached over and held my hand on top of the table, in front of all of them. The soup, Emma said, fierce and small, is the best part. She'd remembered, word for word. Brett, who had lost his deal and his composure, finally found his voice, and it was an ugly one. This is unbelievable. He threw his napkin on the table. You sat there and let this whole thing blow up. You torpedoed Pendleton. Do you have any idea what that deal was worth to me? To this family? He jabbed a finger at me. You could have said one word and saved it. Instead, you played your little game for your ego. You're going to fix this. You owe us that. I owe us that. There it was. The same word from the hallway, money, dressed up as family. I looked at my son-in-law for a long moment. Brett, I said, an hour ago, in the hallway by the men's room, you asked me to fund your company. You wanted my money badly enough to beg for it where nobody could see. I let that land in front of Pamela, whose head turned slowly toward her son. And then you came back to this table and let your wife try to throw me out of it. You wanted my checkbook at the same dinner you wanted me gone. I shook my head, almost gently. Pendleton didn't walk because of me. Pendleton walked because he watched you let it happen. He told you so himself. A man who'll let his wife shame her father for appearances is a man who'll cut any corner. He read you in about 4 seconds. That's why he's good at his job. Brett's face worked. He had no answer because there wasn't one, so he reached for the oldest weapon there is. We'll see how generous you feel, he said. When Lindsay's your only family left and you're alone in that house, I almost smiled. He thought loneliness was a threat he could hold over me. He had no idea I'd already survived the only loneliness that ever mattered. I reached into my coat then, and the table went quiet, because they could see it was a deliberate motion, the motion of a man producing a document. I took out the folder, the one from my lawyer, the transfer papers. I set it on the white tablecloth in the middle of the table, where everyone could see it. I did not open it. "Lindsay," I said, "do you know why I asked you to dinner tonight, at this restaurant in particular?" She shook her head, her eyes on the folder. "Because it's my birthday." I watched it hit her, the date, the things she'd forgotten. "I'm 72 today, and this," I touched the folder, "is a transfer of a controlling interest in Myers Hospitality. 6 restaurants, the holding company, everything your mother and I built. My lawyer drew it up a month ago. I signed my part. I left the date blank so I could fill it in tonight at this table and hand it to you. I came here to give you the company, Lindsay. For your birthday gift to me, I was going to give you my entire life's work." The silence was total. Even the kitchen doors had stopped swinging. "That was the plan," I said, "right up until you told a waiter to move your father to a bar seat." I picked the folder back up. I tapped it square against the table, the way I tap a menu, and I slid it back into my coat. "I'm not going to hand my life's work to someone who's ashamed of where it started," I said. "Your mother wrote a line on the back of our first menu, for the ones who remember where the soup started. That's who gets the company, Lindsay. People who remember. And tonight you showed me, in front of witnesses, that you'd rather forget." I reached for my water glass. It was empty. I'd drunk it to the bottom an hour ago. So I simply set my hand flat beside it, and I let the empty glass sit there between us, and somehow that said more than a full one could have. Emma stood up, 12 years old, in her too big blazer, with tears still on her face. She stood up next to her chair, and she faced the whole table. Her mother, her father, her grandmother Cole. And she said, in a voice that shook but did not stop, "I'm not embarrassed of you, Grandpa." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I think the soup is the best part. I want to learn it. I want you to teach me. You could have knocked me over with a feather." "Emma, sit down," Lindsay said, but it came out weak, the voice of a woman who has lost the moral high ground so completely she can't even discipline her own child with it. "No," Emma said, just that, "no." And she came around the table, past her stunned parents, and she took my arm, and she stood beside me, the soup kid's daughter, choosing the soup. I looked down at her, this brave small person, and then up at my daughter, who was watching her own child take the side she should have taken 20 years ago. And I saw something break in Lindsay's face that was not panic and was not anger. It was, I think, the first real thing I'd seen on her face all night. It was grief, the grief of a person realizing all at once exactly what she's thrown away, and that her own 12-year-old understood it better than she did. "I think," I said quietly to the table, "we're done here." I helped Emma with her chair. I left enough cash on the table to cover the meal. Yes, even though I owned the place, a guest pays, that's the manners Rosemary taught me. And I rested my hand on Desmond's shoulder on the way past. "Thank you," I told him, "for 30 years, and for tonight." Desmond walked us to the door himself, the way he'd walk out, a head of state. Behind us, the table was a wreck of half-eaten plates and ruined plans. Brett was hissing something at Lindsay. Pamela was already gone, her chair pushed back, her pearls and her judgment carried off into the night. The Cole family, that fortress of appearances, had taken one honest look at itself under the lights of my dining room and not liked what it saw. At the door, the cool night air came in, and Emma slipped her hand into mine, and Desmond held the door and said low, "Happy birthday, Mr. Myers. She'll come around, or she won't. Either way, you did right." "I know," I said, and I did know. That was the strange, quiet gift of the whole terrible evening. For 2 years I'd carried a question. Was my daughter kind underneath? And now I had my answer, and an answer, even a hard one, is lighter to carry than a question. I stepped out into my 72nd birthday with my granddaughter's hand in mine and an unopened folder in my coat, and I felt, against all sense, something close to peace. Behind me, in the warm light, my restaurant kept breathing. The floor I built, the people I'd raised up, all of it still mine, still standing, still good. I'd lost a daughter to her own shame a long time ago, it turned out. I just found out for certain tonight. But I'd gained a granddaughter who wanted to learn the soup. That's not nothing. That's a beginning. Here's how it settled, since I know you'll want to know. I didn't sign the company over to Lindsay. Instead, my lawyer and I put Myers Hospitality into a trust, the way I should have done from the start. Desmond Pratt is the chief operating officer now, with a real stake, the dishwasher who became my right hand, earning the thing he never once asked for. The trust funds a culinary scholarship in Rosemary's name for kids who grew up over diners, the soup kids, so that someday they'll be proud instead of ashamed. Lindsay is provided for. I'm not a cruel man, and she's still my daughter. The trust pays her a comfortable income for the rest of her life. What it does not give her is control. Not one vote, not one key. You can love someone and still decline to hand them the wheel. 6 months later, a letter came. 3 pages in Lindsay's handwriting, which I hadn't seen in years. I won't tell you everything it said. But it started with, "Dad, I've been thinking about the cooler," and it ended with, "I'm sorry. I should never have been ashamed of the best part of us." I read it twice. I keep it in the drawer with Rosemary's menu. We're not fixed. A sentence like the one she said at that table doesn't unsay itself in a letter. But the door's open again. Open. Not unlocked all the way. There's a difference, and I finally know it. And Emma? Emma comes every other Saturday. She stands on a step stool at the carriage house pass, and Desmond and I teach her to make the soup of the day. She's getting good at it. She remembers where it started. I'm 72 years old. I built 6 restaurants from $4,000 and a handwritten menu, buried the woman who wrote it, and learned more in one bad dinner than in the 40 good years before it. So here's the only piece of it I'll ask you to keep. You can hand your life's work to your children, but only to the ones who aren't ashamed of where it started. Everyone else gets your love. They don't get the keys. That's my story. One sentence at one dinner told me everything. If someone ever made you feel small for where you came from, don't argue. Just remember who owns the chair. Share this, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.